The morning sun painted the canyon walls in shades of amber and gold as Grey Wolf made his way through the narrow passage. His moccasins moved silently across the rocky ground, each step calculated and deliberate. The Lakota warrior had been tracking the stolen horses for 3 days, following a trail that led him far from his people's territory and into the harsh landscape of the Southwest. The horses belonged to his tribe, taken during a midnight raid that had left 2 of his younger cousins wounded. Grey Wolf's jaw tightened at the memory. The raiders had been skilled, moving like shadows through their camp, but they had made one mistake. They had left behind a distinctive arrowhead, one that marked them as Apache warriors from the desert tribes. As he rounded a bend in the canyon, Grey Wolf stopped abruptly. The scent hit him first. Wood smoke mixed with something else, something that made his instincts sharpen. He pressed himself against the canyon wall, his dark eyes scanning the area ahead. There, partially hidden behind a cluster of red rocks, wisps of smoke rose into the clear morning air. Grey Wolf's hand moved instinctively to the knife at his belt. His grandfather had taught him to read the land like others read words on bark, and everything about this place felt wrong. The smoke was too thin, too controlled. It wasn't the careless fire of travelers resting for the night. This was deliberate, calculated. He crept forward, using the shadows cast by the towering canyon walls to mask his approach. The sound of his own breathing seemed too loud in the stillness. As he drew closer, he could make out shapes moving around the fire. 3 figures, maybe 4, but something else caught his attention. The soft whinny of horses. And among them he recognized the distinctive call of Thunder Runner, his own war pony. The sight of his beloved horse tethered with the others sent a surge of anger through Grey Wolf's chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. His grandfather's voice echoed in his mind. Anger makes a warrior stupid, and stupid warriors don't come home. He studied the camp carefully, noting the positions of the guards, the layout of their supplies, and the terrain that might offer escape routes. The Apache had chosen their spot well. The canyon provided natural walls on 3 sides with only one main entrance. But Grey Wolf had lived his entire life in difficult terrain, and he could see opportunities where others might see only obstacles. As he prepared to move closer, a movement caught his eye. A figure emerged from behind one of the larger rocks, moving with the fluid grace of someone completely at home in this harsh environment. It was a girl, perhaps 16 or 17 summers old, with long dark hair braided with small feathers and beads. She wore traditional Apache clothing, a deerskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork that caught the morning light. Grey Wolf froze, pressing himself deeper into the shadows. The girl moved with purpose, checking on the horses with the confidence of someone who had been around them all her life. But there was something else about her movement, something that made Grey Wolf's warrior instincts prick with awareness. She paused suddenly, her head tilting slightly as if listening to something only she could hear. Her hands stilled on the rope she had been adjusting, and Grey Wolf saw her body tense in a way that reminded him of a deer sensing a predator. She knew something was wrong. Grey Wolf remained perfectly still, barely breathing. He had been trained from childhood in the art of remaining unseen, and he was confident in his abilities. Yet somehow this Apache girl had sensed something. Her dark eyes swept the area where he was hidden, not looking directly at him but searching with the intensity of someone who trusted their instincts completely. The girl's hand moved slowly to a small knife at her side, the movement so subtle that someone less observant might have missed it entirely. But Grey Wolf caught it, and he felt a grudging respect for her awareness. She was young, but she had the instincts of a seasoned warrior. For several long moments they remained frozen in their respective positions, the hidden Lakota warrior and the alert Apache girl. The morning air grew warmer as the sun climbed higher, and Grey Wolf could feel sweat beginning to form on his brow despite the cool temperature. His muscles ached from holding his position, but he dared not move. The girl took a step forward, then another, her movements careful and controlled. She was working her way toward his hiding spot, not directly but in a pattern that would eventually bring her close enough to discover him. Grey Wolf realized with growing admiration that she was using a hunting technique, appearing to go about her normal tasks while systematically checking potential hiding places. Just as she took another step in his direction, a shout erupted from the camp behind her. One of the Apache warriors was calling her name, Ayanna, which Grey Wolf recognized as meaning eternal blossom in her language. The girl hesitated, torn between investigating her suspicions and responding to the call. After a moment that felt like an eternity, she turned and jogged back toward the fire. But Grey Wolf noticed that she kept glancing back over her shoulder, her instinct still telling her that something was amiss. He waited until she had disappeared behind the rocks before allowing himself to exhale slowly. The encounter had lasted only minutes, but it had changed everything. Grey Wolf now knew that recovering his horses would be far more difficult than he had anticipated. The Apache girl possessed an awareness that could make his mission nearly impossible. Yet something about her alertness, her respect for the danger she sensed even when she couldn't see it, earned his grudging admiration. As he settled in to observe the camp and plan his next move, Grey Wolf found himself thinking about the girl named Ayanna. In his tribe, such instincts were highly valued, and he wondered what had taught her to trust her senses so completely. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he now knew that underestimating any member of this Apache band would be a potentially fatal mistake. Ayanna's heart continued to race long after she had returned to the fire. The feeling of being watched clung to her like morning mist, refusing to disappear despite the warmth of the sun on her face. She moved through her morning tasks with practiced efficiency, but her senses remained heightened, every small sound causing her to pause and listen. Her uncle, Stone Bear, looked up from where he was sharpening his spear point. His weathered face showed concern as he studied his niece's tense posture. "What troubles you, little sister?" he asked, using the affectionate term he had called her since childhood. Ayanna glanced toward the canyon walls, her dark eyes searching the shadows one more time. "Something watches us," she said simply, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel eyes upon our camp." Stone Bear set down his weapon and rose to his feet with the fluid motion of a man still dangerous despite his 40 summers. The other two warriors, Red Hawk and Running Bear, also looked up from their tasks. All three men had learned long ago to trust Ayanna's instincts. Her gift for sensing danger had saved their raiding party more than once during their journey into Lakota territory. "Where?" Stone Bear asked, his hand moving casually to rest on his tomahawk handle. Ayanna pointed toward the eastern canyon wall where the shadows lay deepest. "There among the rocks. I cannot see anything, but something hides in the darkness." Red Hawk, the youngest of the warriors at barely 20 summers, scoffed quietly. "Perhaps it is only a mountain cat stalking the horses," he suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. Stone Bear silenced him with a sharp look. "My niece's eyes see what others cannot," he said firmly. "If she says we are watched, then we are watched." The leader of their small band moved with deliberate casualness toward their supply packs, but Ayanna noticed how his eyes constantly scanned the canyon walls. Stone Bear had not survived 15 years of raiding by ignoring potential threats, especially when those warnings came from someone whose instincts had proven reliable time and again. "Running Bear," Stone Bear said quietly. "Take the horses to water, but be ready to move quickly if needed." The older warrior nodded and began gathering the lead ropes, his movements unhurried but purposeful. Ayanna felt the familiar twist of fear and excitement in her stomach. Her gift for sensing danger had manifested when she was barely 12 summers old, during her first raid with the men of her band. She had suddenly insisted they change their planned route, though she could not explain why. Later, they discovered that Comanche warriors had been waiting in ambush along their original path. Since that day, Stone Bear had insisted she accompany their raids, despite the protests of some of the older women in their tribe. "A warrior who ignores good medicine is a fool," he had declared, and no one had argued with him after her warnings had saved them from 3 more potential disasters. Now, as she watched Running Bear lead the stolen horses toward the small spring deeper in the canyon, Ayanna tried to understand what her instincts were telling her. The feeling of being observed was different from the usual animal presence she sometimes sensed. This felt intelligent, purposeful, and patient in a way that made her skin prickle with unease. She moved to help Red Hawk pack their remaining supplies, but her attention remained focused on the shadows where she felt the unseen watcher hiding. Whoever it was possessed remarkable skill to remain so well concealed. Even now, knowing someone was there, she could detect no movement, no sound, no visible sign of an intruder. Could it be one of the Lakota following their stolen horses? She asked Stone Bear in a voice so low that only he could hear. Her uncle's expression grew thoughtful. They had taken the horses from a Lakota camp 3 days' ride to the north, and he had expected pursuit. But the raiding party had covered their tracks carefully, taking routes through rocky terrain that would make following them difficult even for skilled trackers. "If it is a Lakota warrior, he is alone," Stone Bear replied quietly. "Otherwise, they would have attacked already or attempted to negotiate for the return of their property." Ayanna nodded, understanding his reasoning. A group of warriors would have the strength to demand the return of their horses. A single tracker would need to be more careful, studying the situation before acting. The thought that one man had followed them so far and managed to locate their camp filled her with a mixture of respect and apprehension. "What do we do?" Red Hawk asked, having overheard their whispered conversation. Stone Bear was quiet for a long moment, his experienced mind weighing their options. They could pack quickly and leave, but the horses needed rest and water after their long journey. They could attempt to hunt down the hidden watcher, but doing so in his chosen terrain would put them at a disadvantage. Or they could remain alert and see what the observer intended to do. "We continue as planned," Stone Bear decided, "but everyone stays armed and ready. Ayanna, you will watch the eastern wall. If our visitor moves or tries to approach, signal us immediately." As the morning progressed, Ayanna found herself engaged in a strange, silent battle of patience with the unseen watcher. She went about her tasks normally, helping to prepare a meal and tending to equipment. But part of her attention never wavered from the spot where she felt his presence. She began to develop a grudging respect for whoever was hidden in those shadows. The sun climbed higher, making the rocks almost too hot to touch, yet she sensed no movement from his position. Such patience required not only skill but also considerable mental discipline. Most warriors she knew would have grown restless by now, making some small mistake that would reveal their location. During the hottest part of the day, when the canyon walls seemed to shimmer with heat, Ayanna noticed something that made her pulse quicken. One of the horses, a magnificent black stallion that had been the prize of their raid, kept looking toward the eastern wall and nickering softly. Animals often sensed things that humans missed, and this horse's behavior confirmed what her instincts had been telling her all morning. She caught Stone Bear's eye and nodded toward the horse. Her uncle followed her gaze and understood immediately. His weathered features tightened almost imperceptibly, and she saw him signal the other warriors with subtle hand gestures. The afternoon shadows began to lengthen, and still their invisible observer maintained his position. Ayanna found herself wondering about this unknown warrior, who possessed such remarkable patience and skill. What kind of man could remain motionless for so many hours under the desert sun? What drove him to follow them alone into dangerous territory? As evening approached and they began preparing their evening meal, Ayanna realized that the strange deadlock could not continue indefinitely. Something would have to change, and when it did, she suspected that all their lives might depend on how quickly they could react to whatever their hidden watcher had planned. As the sun began its descent toward the canyon rim, Grey Wolf felt the burning ache in his muscles from maintaining his hidden position throughout the long day. His respect for the Apache girl had grown with each passing hour as he watched her subtle surveillance of his hiding place. She never looked directly at him, but he could sense her awareness like a constant pressure against his consciousness. The heat radiating from the rocks had become almost unbearable during the midday hours, yet Grey Wolf had not moved so much as a finger. His grandfather's training had prepared him for such endurance, but the mental strain of knowing he was being watched while watching others tested even his considerable discipline. Through his careful observation, Grey Wolf had learned much about his adversaries. The leader, whom he had heard called Stone Bear, was clearly an experienced warrior who commanded the respect of his men. The girl, Ayanna, was not merely a camp follower, but seemed to hold an important role in the group's security. The two younger warriors, while skilled, deferred to both Stone Bear and the girl in matters of caution and awareness. As shadows began to lengthen across the canyon floor, Grey Wolf knew he would soon need to make a decision. His original plan of waiting for darkness to attempt recovering the horses had become complicated by Ayanna's vigilance. Even if he could approach the animals without alerting the men, he was certain the girl would sense his movement long before he could reach them. A new sound caught his attention, the distant rumble of thunder echoing off the canyon walls. Grey Wolf's eyes moved to the sky above the canyon rim, where dark clouds were beginning to gather. The afternoon storms that sometimes swept through this region could provide both opportunity and danger. Rain would mask sounds and scents, but it could also trap him in the canyon if the washes began to flood. Below in the camp, he could see that Stone Bear had also noticed the approaching weather. The Apache leader was directing his warriors to secure their supplies and move them to higher ground. But it was Ayana's reaction that caught Grey Wolf's attention. The girl had suddenly frozen in place, her head tilted in a listening posture that he had observed several times throughout the day. Grey Wolf strained his own senses, trying to detect whatever had alarmed her. Then he heard it, a sound that made his blood run cold. From somewhere deeper in the canyon came the distinctive howl of wolves, but not the normal hunting call of a pack. This was the deliberate signal howl that warriors sometimes use to communicate across distances. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Other Lakota warriors had found the trail and were approaching the canyon. Grey Wolf's mind raced as he considered the implications. If his tribesmen attacked without knowing he was present, he could easily be killed in the confusion. But if he revealed himself now, the Apache would know they were surrounded and might kill the horses rather than let them be recaptured. In the camp below, Stone Bear had heard the wolf calls as well. The Apache leader barked sharp orders in his native language, and Grey Wolf watched as the warriors immediately began preparing for an attack. Weapons were checked, positions were chosen, and the horses were quickly moved to a more defensible location. But it was Ayana who made the move that changed everything. Instead of taking cover with the others, she began walking deliberately toward the eastern canyon wall, directly toward Grey Wolf's hiding place. Her movements were slow and non-threatening, but purposeful in a way that made Grey Wolf's heart pound. She stopped perhaps 30 feet from where he crouched among the rocks, and spoke in clear, carefully pronounced Lakota words. "Warrior who watches from the shadows," she called, her young voice carrying clearly in the still air before the storm. "Your brothers approach with war cries. Do you wish them to find only our bodies and dead horses?" Grey Wolf felt a chill that had nothing to do with the approaching storm. The girl had not only detected his presence, but had also understood enough about the situation to recognize the approaching danger to everyone involved. Her words revealed a wisdom beyond her years and a pragmatic understanding of their mutual predicament. Stone Bear and the other warriors had turned to stare at their young companion in amazement. It was clear they had not expected her to make direct contact with their hidden observer, but rather than calling her back, Stone Bear waited to see what would happen, his hand resting on his weapon but not yet drawing it. "Your horses were taken honorably in war," Ayana continued, still speaking in Lakota, though Grey Wolf could hear the strain in her voice as she worked to find the right words in his language. "But if blood is spilled in this canyon today, the horses will die with us. Is this the outcome you seek?" The wolf howls came again, closer this time, and Grey Wolf could hear the sound of horses approaching through the canyon passages. His fellow warriors would arrive within minutes, and when they did, the small canyon would become a battlefield. In such close quarters, with crossfire and confusion, the chances of anyone surviving were small. Grey Wolf made a decision that went against every instinct of caution his grandfather had taught him. Slowly, carefully, he rose from his hiding place and stepped into view. His hands were empty but ready to reach for weapons if needed. The two younger Apache warriors immediately raised their bows, but Stone Bear gestured for them to wait. "I am Grey Wolf of the Lakota," he announced in Apache, surprising them with his knowledge of their language. "Those are my people approaching, and yes, they come for war." Ayana's eyes widened slightly, but she stood her ground even though she was now caught between the two groups of warriors. Stone Bear stepped forward, his weathered face showing grudging respect for Grey Wolf's courage in revealing himself. "I am Stone Bear," the Apache leader replied in Lakota, showing that he too understood his enemy's tongue. "Your horses were taken fairly, but perhaps today is not a good day for anyone to die." The thunder was growing louder and the first drops of rain began to fall into the canyon. But Grey Wolf knew the storm that was about to break over them had nothing to do with the weather. In the next few minutes, decisions would be made that could end in bloodshed for all of them, or possibly lead to an outcome none of them had expected when the day began. Ayana remained motionless between the two groups, her presence somehow symbolic of the fragile moment that hung between them. Grey Wolf found himself studying her face, seeing intelligence and courage that reminded him of his own sister. The thought of this brave young woman dying in a pointless battle made his next words easier to speak. There is another way, he said, his voice carrying to both groups of warriors. But it will require trust from all of us. The silence that followed Grey Wolf's words seemed to stretch longer than the entire day he had spent hidden in the rocks. Stone Bear's weathered features remained impassive, but Ayanna could see the calculations running behind his dark eyes. The approaching wolf howls grew closer, and she estimated they had perhaps minutes before the Lakota war party reached the canyon entrance. "Speak quickly," Stone Bear said, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to making life or death decisions. "My ears are open, but my patience grows thin." Grey Wolf stepped slightly closer, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. The rain was beginning to fall more steadily now, creating small rivulets that ran down the canyon walls and pooled in the rocky depressions around them. "My war party numbers 8 warriors," Grey Wolf said, meeting Stone Bear's gaze directly. "They believe they are hunting horse thieves who will not expect pursuit. They plan to attack at sunset when the light favors their approach." Ayanna felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling air. 8 against 4. The numbers alone would be devastating, especially in the confined space of the canyon. But there was something in Grey Wolf's tone that suggested he was offering more than just information. "You have shown honor by revealing yourself," Stone Bear acknowledged. "But why do you tell us this? It would be easier to let your warriors attack and claim the glory for yourself." Grey Wolf's expression grew somber. "Because I have watched your camp all day, and I have seen that you are not common raiders. The girl," he nodded toward Ayanna, "possesses a gift that is respected among my people. To kill such a person for the sake of horses would bring dishonor to my family's name." Ayanna felt heat rise in her cheeks at this unexpected recognition from an enemy warrior. Among her own people, her abilities were valued but also sometimes viewed with suspicion. To hear them acknowledged with respect by a Lakota surprised her. Stone Bear studied Grey Wolf for a long moment. "What do you propose?" "A contest of honor," Grey Wolf replied. "Single combat between champions. If your warrior wins, my people will withdraw and leave you the horses. If I win, the horses return with us, but your people go free and unharmed." Red Hawk, who had been listening intently, stepped forward with fire in his young eyes. "I will fight this Lakota dog," he declared, his hand moving to his knife handle. But Stone Bear raised a hand to silence him. "This is not your decision to make, nephew." He turned back to Grey Wolf. "Why should I trust the word of a man whose people I do not know? How can I be certain your warriors will honor such an agreement?" The wolf howls came again, much closer now, and Ayanna could hear the sound of horses moving through the rocky passages. Time was running out for all of them. She made a decision that surprised even herself. "Because I will go with him," she said clearly, stepping forward to stand beside Grey Wolf. Both groups of warriors stared at her in shock. "I will be his guarantee that the agreement is honored." "Ayanna, no." Stone Bear's voice carried genuine alarm. "I will not allow you to put yourself in such danger." But the girl's chin lifted with stubborn determination. "Uncle, my gift tells me this man speaks truth." He could have remained hidden and let his warriors attack without warning. Instead, he chose to reveal himself and seek a way to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Such honor deserves to be answered with honor. Grey Wolf felt a surge of admiration for this brave young woman, who was willing to risk her life to prevent a battle. But he also recognized the wisdom in her proposal. "She would be my guest, not my prisoner," he said to Stone Bear. "On my grandfather's grave, I swear she would be treated with all respect and returned safely regardless of the contest's outcome." Stone Bear's weathered face showed the strain of making an impossible choice. To agree might save lives, but it would also place his beloved niece in mortal danger. To refuse would almost certainly mean death for all of them when the Lakota war party arrived. Running Bear, who had been quietly observing the exchange, suddenly spoke up. "The storm grows stronger," he pointed out. "If we are to do this thing, it must be now before the rain makes the canyon floor treacherous." As if summoned by his words, a brilliant flash of lightning illuminated the canyon, followed immediately by a crash of thunder that echoed off the walls like the sound of battle drums. The symbolic nature of the moment was lost on no one present. "I accept," Stone Bear said finally, his voice heavy with reluctance. "But I will be the one to fight. This is my war party, and the responsibility is mine." Grey Wolf nodded respectfully. "It will be an honor to face a warrior of your reputation." Ayanna felt her heart racing as she realized what she had set in motion. In agreeing to serve as guarantee for the arrangement, she had essentially placed her life in the hands of strangers. Yet something about Grey Wolf's manner convinced her that he was a man of his word. The sound of approaching horses grew louder, and Grey Wolf turned toward the canyon entrance. I must go to meet my warriors and explain the situation. The contest should take place in the center of the canyon, where both groups can observe and ensure fairness. How long do we have? Stone Bear asked. Give me until the rain stops, Grey Wolf replied. If my warriors refuse to honor the arrangement, the contest is void, and you are free to defend yourselves as you see fit. As Grey Wolf prepared to leave, Ayanna called out to him. Lakota warrior, she said, and he turned back to face her. What happens if neither fighter can defeat the other? Grey Wolf considered the question seriously. Then both our peoples will have proven their courage. And perhaps we can find another solution that honors both sides. With that, he melted back into the shadows as suddenly as he had appeared, leaving the Apache warriors to contemplate the strange turn their day had taken. In the distance, the wolf howls had stopped, replaced by the drumming of rain and the approaching sound of many horses. Ayanna stood in the center of the canyon, rain soaking through her deerskin dress, and wondered if her decision to trust a stranger would save them all or doom them to an even worse fate. The next hour would determine whether her instincts about Grey Wolf's character were as reliable as her ability to sense danger. The rain drummed steadily against the canyon walls as Grey Wolf made his way toward the sound of approaching horses. His mind worked furiously, trying to find the right words to convince his war party to accept an arrangement that went against everything they had expected when they began their pursuit. He found them at the canyon's main entrance, 8 warriors mounted on their best horses, weapons ready for battle. Their leader, Swift Eagle, was Grey Wolf's own cousin and had been chosen to lead the pursuit when Grey Wolf had failed to return from his scouting mission. Grey Wolf, Swift Eagle called out as he spotted his cousin emerging from the canyon shadows. We feared you were dead. Are the horse thieves trapped inside? They are, Grey Wolf replied, but his tone carried none of the satisfaction his cousin expected. But the situation has become more complex than we anticipated. He quickly explained what had transpired during his day of observation, emphasizing Ayanna's remarkable awareness and the respect he had developed for Stone Bear's leadership. When he described the proposed contest of single combat, several of the warriors exchanged skeptical glances. Swift Eagle's weathered face showed clear displeasure. You want us to risk everything on a fight between 2 men? Brother, we have the advantage of numbers. Why give that up for Apache promises? Because honor demands it, Grey Wolf replied firmly. I gave my word, and the girl put her life at stake to prevent bloodshed. Would you have me break an oath sworn before witnesses? The debate that followed was intense but brief. The rain continued to fall, and they all knew that prolonged discussion would accomplish nothing. Finally, Swift Eagle raised his hand for silence. The decision is yours to make, he told Grey Wolf. If you believe this is the path of honor, then I will support you. But if the Apache prove treacherous, the girl's life will not protect them from our anger. Back in the canyon, Ayanna helped her uncle prepare for the contest while trying to calm her racing heart. Stone Bear moved with the methodical precision of a man who had faced death many times before, checking his weapons and testing the flexibility of his muscles despite the cooling rain. You should not have offered to guarantee the agreement, Stone Bear said quietly as he adjusted his leather arm guards. If this Grey Wolf proves false, you will pay the price for my decisions. The risk was necessary, Ayanna replied, though her voice carried a slight tremor. My instincts tell me he is an honorable man, but more than that, I sense something unusual about him. He reminds me of the old stories grandmother used to tell about warriors who carried the blessing of the spirits. Stone Bear paused in his preparations to study his niece's face. Her gift for sensing things others could not had never failed them before, and if she felt something special about this Lakota warrior, he would trust her judgment. The rain began to lighten as the sound of many horses entered the canyon. Ayanna watched as 8 Lakota warriors rode into view, their presence filling the confined space with an almost overwhelming sense of controlled power. They arranged themselves in a semicircle at one end of the canyon, while the Apache took positions at the other end. Grey Wolf dismounted and walked to the center of the space, where rainwater had collected in small pools among the rocks. He was followed by Stone Bear, who moved with the confident stride of a man comfortable with his fate. Before we begin, Grey Wolf called out so both groups could hear, Let all present understand the terms. This combat is to first blood or until one fighter yields. The winner's people claim the horses, but no other blood will be shed this day. All swear to honor this agreement. A chorus of voices from both sides confirmed their acceptance, though Ayanna noticed that some of the younger warriors on both sides seemed disappointed by the restrictions. She remained near the canyon wall, close enough to observe every detail but positioned where she could quickly reach either group if needed. The two warriors began to circle each other, their movements careful on the wet rocks. Stone Bear carried a war club and knife, while Grey Wolf had chosen a tomahawk and a longer blade. Both men were experienced fighters, and their initial movements were cautious as they tested each other's reactions and looked for openings. Stone Bear struck first, his war club whistling through the air where Grey Wolf's head had been a moment before. The Lakota warrior's response was immediate, his tomahawk cutting downward in an arc that would have split Stone Bear's skull if the Apache had not twisted away at the last instant. The fight that followed was unlike anything Ayanna had ever witnessed. Both warriors moved with deadly grace, their weapons meeting in a series of strikes and parries that sent sparks flying and rang like thunder off the canyon walls. Neither man gave ground unnecessarily, but neither could gain a decisive advantage. As the minutes passed, Ayanna began to realize that the combat might last much longer than anyone had anticipated. Both fighters were skilled, experienced, and perfectly matched in many ways. Stone Bear had the advantage of size and reach, but Grey Wolf moved with a fluid speed that made him difficult to pin down. Blood began to flow from small cuts on both men as their weapons found their marks in minor ways. A slice across Stone Bear's forearm, a gash on Grey Wolf's shoulder, but nothing serious enough to end the contest. The watching warriors grew restless as the fight continued without a clear resolution. Then disaster struck in the form of loose, rain-slicked rock. As Stone Bear launched a powerful overhead strike, his foot slipped on the wet surface. He stumbled forward off balance, and Grey Wolf's tomahawk swept upward in what should have been a fatal blow. But instead of completing the strike, Grey Wolf checked his weapon at the last moment, the sharp edge stopping just inches from Stone Bear's exposed neck. The Apache warrior froze, knowing that his life had just been spared by his enemy's mercy. "Yield," Grey Wolf said quietly, his tomahawk still poised but motionless. "You fought with honor, but the rocks have decided the outcome." Stone Bear's breathing was heavy as he slowly straightened, his eyes meeting Grey Wolf's with an expression of profound respect. "I yield," he said clearly, his voice carrying to both groups of watching warriors. "The victory is yours." A cheer went up from the Lakota warriors, but it was subdued, as if they too recognized that something more significant than a simple contest had just taken place. Grey Wolf lowered his weapon and stepped back, offering his hand to help Stone Bear regain his footing. "You fought like a true warrior," Grey Wolf said, as Stone Bear accepted his assistance. "It was the rain that defeated you, not any lack of skill." Stone Bear nodded gravely. "The spirits chose their favorite today," he replied. "I accept their judgment." As the two groups prepared to complete the exchange of horses, Ayanna felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. The immediate danger had passed, but she realized that this encounter had changed all of them in ways they were only beginning to understand. The decision to trust a stranger had proven correct, but it had also opened questions about the future that none of them had expected to face. The immediate aftermath of the contest brought an unexpected stillness to the canyon. Both groups of warriors seemed unsure how to proceed, as if the formal nature of the combat had created a temporary truce that none of them quite knew how to break. The rain had stopped completely, leaving the air fresh and clean, but heavy with unspoken tensions. Ayanna watched as Grey Wolf helped Stone Bear bind the cut on his arm, their earlier enmity replaced by the mutual respect that often developed between warriors who had tested each other's courage. Yet she could sense the underlying current of uncertainty that ran through both groups. The contest had been won and lost, but the larger questions of what came next remained unanswered. "The horses are yours by right of victory," Stone Bear said formally, addressing Grey Wolf but speaking loudly enough for all to hear. "We will gather our belongings and depart as agreed." But Grey Wolf raised a hand to stop him. "Before you go," he said, his voice carrying a thoughtful tone that made everyone pause, "there is something that troubles me about this day's events." Swift Eagle, who had been preparing to round up the recovered horses, turned to face his cousin with questioning eyes. The other Lakota warriors also showed surprise at Grey Wolf's hesitation to claim their prize and depart. "Speak your thoughts," Stone Bear replied, though Ayanna could see wariness creeping back into his expression. Grey Wolf looked between the two groups, his gaze lingering for a moment on Ayanna before he continued. "We came here seeking justice for a raid on our camp. You came here following the ancient custom of taking horses to prove your worth as warriors. Both purposes are honorable, but I find myself wondering if there might be wisdom in understanding why our paths crossed in this way." Ayanna felt her pulse quicken. There was something in Grey Wolf's tone that suggested he was working toward a larger point, though she could not yet see where his thoughts were leading. "The girl," Grey Wolf continued, nodding toward Ayanna, "possesses a gift that my grandfather would have called the sight that sees beyond seeing. Such abilities are rare and valued among my people. Yet she uses her gift to serve raiders who take horses from those who might need them for survival." Stone Bear's expression hardened at what seemed like criticism of their mission, but Grey Wolf quickly raised his hand in a gesture of peace. "I do not judge your choices," Grey Wolf clarified, "but I have spent this day observing all of you, and I see skills and courage that could serve a greater purpose than simple horse raiding." Swift Eagle stepped forward, his face showing confusion. "Cousin, what are you suggesting? We have won back our property. Should we not return to our people and celebrate this victory?" Grey Wolf turned to face his war party, and Ayanna could see that he was struggling with a decision that would affect everyone present. 3 days ago, when we discovered our horses had been stolen, my first thought was of revenge. But today, watching these Apache warriors, I have seen something that reminds me of stories my grandfather used to tell. He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. "There are tales of times when enemies became allies when they recognized that they faced a common threat greater than their differences. Watching the skill and honor displayed here today makes me wonder if such a time might be approaching again." Ayanna felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the cooling air. Her gift was stirring again, but this time it was not warning her of immediate danger. Instead, she sensed the approach of something significant, something that would change the course of many lives. "What common threat do you speak of?" Stone Bear asked, his voice carefully neutral. Grey Wolf's expression grew grave. 2 weeks ago, runners came to our village with news from the eastern tribes. White soldiers have been seen moving in large numbers toward our lands, more than have ever been gathered in one place before. They bring with them new weapons and speak of claiming all the territory between the great river and the mountains. The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of unease among both groups of warriors. Ayanna had heard similar rumors in her own tribe, though the Apache leaders had dismissed them as exaggerated fears spread by nervous traders. "If this is true," Running Bear said slowly, "then all our peoples face a danger greater than any tribal dispute." "It is true," Swift Eagle confirmed reluctantly. "Our scouts have seen the dust of their passage and counted their numbers. They are more numerous than all our tribes combined, and they seem determined to take our lands whether we resist or not." Ayanna stepped forward, her young voice carrying clearly in the hushed canyon. "My gift tells me that this meeting today was not chance," she said, surprising herself with her boldness. "The spirits brought us together for a purpose beyond the recovery of stolen horses." Both groups turned to look at her, and she felt the weight of their attention like a physical pressure. But her instincts were speaking clearly now, and she trusted them completely. "The old ways of constant warfare between our tribes have served their purpose," she continued, her confidence growing as she spoke. "But if we continue to weaken each other with raids and counter-raids, we will have no strength left to face the real threat when it arrives." Stone Bear studied his niece with a mixture of pride and concern. He had never heard her speak so boldly in front of so many warriors, but her words carried the ring of truth that he had learned to respect. Grey Wolf nodded slowly. "The girl speaks wisdom beyond her years," he said. "Perhaps it is time to consider whether our ancestors' enemies might become our children's allies." The silence that followed stretched long enough for the implications of his words to sink in. Both groups of warriors were grappling with ideas that challenged everything they had been taught about their relationships with other tribes. Finally, Swift Eagle spoke the question that was in everyone's mind. "Even if what you say is true, how could such an alliance be forged? Our peoples have been enemies for generations. Blood has been spilled on both sides. How could such wounds be healed? Grey Wolf looked directly at Ayanna as he answered. Perhaps it begins with small steps, with individuals who choose to see beyond old hatreds to new possibilities. Ayanna felt her heart racing, as she realized that her decision to guarantee the contest agreement had set in motion something far larger than she had ever imagined. The day that had begun with the simple recovery of stolen horses was ending with the possibility of changing the relationships between entire peoples. But she also sensed that they stood at a crossroads where the wrong choice could lead to disaster for everyone involved. The next words spoken would determine whether this moment of possibility would flourish or die before it could take root. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone in the canyon like the heavy air before a thunderstorm. Ayanna could feel the tension as each warrior wrestled with ideas that could reshape their understanding of honor, loyalty, and survival. The wet rocks around them seemed to hold their breath, waiting for someone to speak the words that would determine their collective fate. It was Stone Bear who finally broke the silence, his weathered voice carrying the authority of a man who had seen enough warfare to understand its true cost. In my 40 summers I have led more raids than I can count, he said slowly. I have taken horses, counted coup on enemies, and brought glory to my people. But I have also buried too many young warriors whose lives were cut short by conflicts that solved nothing. He looked around at the faces watching him, Apache and Lakota alike. If there is wisdom in considering a new path, then perhaps we owe it to those we have lost to at least listen to what the spirits might be telling us through today's events. Ayanna felt a surge of pride in her uncle's words, but also a growing sense of responsibility. Her gift had brought them to this moment, but she understood that what happened next would require more than spiritual insight. It would demand practical wisdom and careful planning. If our tribes were to consider such an alliance, she said, addressing both groups, it could not be built on words alone. There would need to be actions that prove the sincerity of both sides. Grey Wolf nodded approvingly. The girl speaks truth. Trust between enemies is not easily earned, and it would need to be demonstrated in ways that both peoples could understand and accept. Swift Eagle, who had remained silent during much of the discussion, finally voiced the concern that Ayanna could see troubling several of the warriors. Even if we who stand here today could agree to such a thing, how could we convince our chiefs and councils? They would see any alliance with former enemies as weakness or betrayal. Not if it brought clear benefits to both tribes, Running Bear suggested. The Apache know the desert trails better than any people. The Lakota understand the movement of buffalo herds and the patterns of northern weather. Together we might prosper in ways that neither could achieve alone. Grey Wolf's expression showed that he was working through the practical implications of what they were discussing. There would need to be a formal proposal, something that our leaders could consider without losing face with their own people. And there would need to be guarantees, Stone Bear added. Ways to ensure that such an alliance could not be used by either side to gain advantage over the other. Ayanna found herself thinking of the stories her grandmother had told about the old days, when tribal alliances had sometimes formed to face common threats. Those partnerships had usually been temporary, lasting only as long as the immediate danger persisted. But the threat Grey Wolf described sounded like something that would require a more permanent solution. What if, she said hesitantly, the alliance began with something smaller, not a formal treaty between all our peoples, but a partnership between selected warriors who could prove that cooperation was possible? The idea seemed to capture everyone's attention. It offered a way to test the concept without committing entire tribes to an uncertain experiment. A joint war party, Grey Wolf said thoughtfully. Apache and Lakota warriors working together to scout the movements of these white soldiers, gathering information that could benefit both our peoples while demonstrating that we can fight side by side. It would need to be voluntary, Stone Bear emphasized. No warrior should be forced to ride with former enemies. Only those who choose such a path should be asked to walk it. Swift Eagle looked around at his fellow Lakota warriors, trying to gauge their reactions to the radical proposal. How many would be willing to consider such a thing? He asked. One by one, the Lakota warriors indicated their willingness to at least explore the possibility. Some showed more enthusiasm than others, but none refused outright. Among the Apache, the response was similar. Cautious interest mixed with determination to see where this unexpected path might lead. Then perhaps we should speak of details, Grey Wolf said. If we are to present this idea to our leaders, we will need a specific proposal, not just vague hopes. The discussion that followed was intense and sometimes heated as both sides worked through the countless practical challenges such an alliance would face. Questions of leadership, territory, shared resources, and mutual obligations all needed to be addressed. As the afternoon sun began to slant through the canyon, creating long shadows on the rocks where they had fought just hours before, a framework began to emerge. A small group of volunteers from each tribe would form a joint scouting party, tasked with gathering intelligence about the movements and intentions of the white soldiers. The information they gathered would be shared equally between both peoples, and the success or failure of their cooperation would determine whether the alliance concept had merit. The horses, Stone Bear said as the discussion wound down, should remain with the Lakota as originally agreed, but perhaps they could be considered a gift cementing this new understanding rather than simply the spoils of victory. Grey Wolf smiled at the diplomatic way Stone Bear had reframed the transfer. "Your generosity honors both our peoples," he replied formally. "And perhaps when our joint scouts return with their first reports, the Lakota will find ways to demonstrate similar generosity." Ayanna felt a deep sense of satisfaction as she watched the two groups begin to interact with something approaching friendship rather than mere truce. Her instincts had guided her correctly throughout this long, dangerous day, but she also recognized that the real work was just beginning. As preparations began for departure, Grey Wolf approached her privately. "Your gift brought us to this moment," he said quietly, "but I sense that your role in what follows will be even more important than what you have already done." "What do you mean?" Ayanna asked, though part of her already suspected what he was going to say. "The joint scouting party will need someone who can sense danger before it appears," Grey Wolf explained. "Someone whose instincts both sides have learned to trust. Would you be willing to ride with warriors from both tribes as we begin this new path?" Ayanna looked around the canyon where her life had changed so dramatically in the course of a single day. The decision Grey Wolf was asking her to make would take her far from everything familiar, into a future filled with uncertainty and risk. Yet her gift was already stirring, telling her that this was exactly where she needed to be. "Yes," she said simply. "When do we begin?" As the sun set over the canyon rim, painting the rock walls in shades of gold and crimson, Ayanna stood with warriors from two tribes who had been enemies that morning, but were now partners in an experiment that could change the fate of all their peoples. The day that had begun with the recovery of stolen horses was ending with the birth of something entirely new. An alliance forged not in desperation, but in hope, and guided by the gift of a young woman who had learned to trust what others could not see.